We're going to divide this meeting into two sections. One, first section on the area of specific nutritional ideas and concepts that we hope and we expect to be part of what ultimately may be a next generation or a next generation in the approach to infant feeding in children. And then a new way that combines both what we believe is cutting-edge technology as well as the flexibility to deliver to infants and children a new way of providing nutrition that allows for a significant amount of flexibility that we think will be important as we learn more and more about how things should evolve. A fair amount of this, of course, is related to the fact that we understand that the first year of life is critical in the nutrition of a child, and at the same time, the nutrition delivered by what we consider the most important model of nutrition, which is breastfeeding and breast milk, can deliver. We'll begin with two short presentations by people who need relatively little introduction. The first one will be by Dr. Bo Lőnnerdal, who's professor of nutrition, internal medicine at University of California at Davis. And Bo, as most of you know, has been working in the area of specific approaches to nutrition, including the understanding of early nutrition, the implications of that, and the changing composition of the nutrition that we provide infants and children in the first few months of life. The second presenter will be Eckhard Ziegler. Eckhard is a professor of pediatrics and neonatology, Fomen Nutrition Unit at the University of Iowa. And Eckhard, of course, is also very well known for the work that he has done over the years as it relates to the effects of or the requirements on the nutritional needs and how to provide these needs to infants, particularly in the early months of life. That'll be the first nutrition component of this with these two presentations. I'm going to invite Bo to come to the podium and start the conversation.
Thank you, Pepe. I appreciate the invitation to come and share a bit about the research I've been involved in and also some of the implications of that research for what you're going to see in the second half, which is coming later on. We all know that short term, that is during the first year of life, there are pronounced differences still today between breastfed and formula-fed infants. They have different growth patterns, and many of you are aware now with the new WHO growth patterns for breastfed infants, or based on breastfed infants. They have different nutritional status. I can't go into detail there, but many of the nutrients that you would measure in serum are different in formula-fed and breastfed infants. The breastfed infants have fewer infections, and when they get infected, a lot of times they are of shorter duration. That, of course, happens in developing countries, but we have shown it in Davis, California, and as of a few months ago, we have also shown similar things in northern Sweden, a large clinical trial that we did there. The breastfed infants had fewer infections, even in very kind of socioeconomic upper level with few health problems. And certainly they have different gut microflora that we in the past called bifidoflora. Today we have other names for it, and we have much more sophisticated methods to analyze the microflora, which we don't have too much time to talk about today. But we also know that the long-term consequences of breastfeeding and formula feeding are quite different. This is, of course, very difficult to assess, but there are now meta-analyses that have been done when you put together a lot of studies, and the level of evidence is differently strong for the different types here, but certainly there are strong indications and some evidence for less obesity, less diabetes type 1 and type 2, cardiovascular disease, and delayed cognitive development in the breastfed infants as compared to formula-fed infants. So that means we have work to do. One of the things that we're going to discuss today, which has been kind of a topic of interest for me for quite some time since, like Pepe said, I've done research on breast milk composition. And what happens there, of course, is that breast milk composition varies among women and during the lactation period. It's a very dynamic diet. It changes with lactation time and therefore also, of course, with the needs of the newborn breastfed infant. Infant formula, a lot of times up to very recently, has been the same product, the same composition from day 0 or day 1 as at 6 months of age. And in some areas, like in North America, a lot of times the same diet up to 12 months. It's a very static diet. It doesn't change much. And here you can see just one nutrient, and since I'm a protein biochemist by training, you can see here that I'm homing in on protein, and you're going to hear quite a bit about protein. But here is kind of the average levels you would see in commercial infant formula in North America and Europe today. It varies somewhere between about 12.5 up to 15 grams per liter. But you can see that breast milk is only in this range for a very short period of time, then it is substantially lower after that. So all formula-fed infants get more protein than breastfed infants, and they should get more, definitely, because you have issues like digestibility, etc. But my firm belief is that they are getting too much protein, and we should do something about that. Not only does protein change during lactation, but the different protein classes, which are quite different in their function and composition, etc., they also vary, and relatively few people are aware of that. When you buy infant formula or you read information, you will see the casein-whey ratio being discussed. That is, there are two major milk protein classes, the caseins, which if it's cow's milk is what you make cheese from, and whey is kind of the leftover, the other protein, so to speak. And you can see that in breast milk, the whey proteins are very, very high in colostrum in early lactation, and then it drops down and falls into a more steady level a bit into lactation. Casein is virtually absent in colostrum. It's a very clear solution, and you don't have much casein subunits at all. These are proteins that tend to aggregate, and colostrum is usually clear. Then in a few days time, then casein synthesis picks up, goes up, and then that also falls in a more steady level, like the whey proteins. So if you graph, and in this case I've taken just 2 of the subjects in one of our studies, you can see that the whey protein or the whey casein ratio is not a set ratio. It varies during lactation. And this is most likely, there's most likely reason behind that. I think it reflects what infants digest, their digestive capability, their nutrient needs, and the function of these proteins. But I'll come back to that in a few minutes. And you can see here that some of the whey proteins that I will discuss in a few minutes, they go down to at different levels. Alpha-lactalbumin, a major whey protein, stays high all the time. Lactoferrin, which my research group is particularly interested in, drops and then stays at this level. Secretory IgA, the major immunoglobulin in breast milk, also starts high, comes down, and falls more slowly. While a protein like serum albumin, which is actually not made by the mammary gland, it's transported in from the bloodstream into milk. And a lot of times when people discuss functions of human milk proteins, they assume that they're made by the mammary gland. No, virtually all plasma proteins will go over into breast milk, and just the fact that you find them in there doesn't mean that they have a function. They also, of course, serve as a source of amino acids. So the concept of staging is why we are all here today, and I would like to discuss that from my perspective a little bit. And this is something I drafted quite some time ago. It's hypothetical, but my suggestion at that time would be that for each given time period, from early on in the infant's life, it should receive a formula with a higher protein level. Then later on, when protein requirement goes down, it should be lower. And then further down, it can be even lower than that. In that case, it would come closer to breast milk. Again, it should not be the same as breast milk, but it should come closer. And this was just a tentative suggestion. It was very difficult. I talked certainly to infant formula manufacturer, their R&D, and they just said that the message to the mothers is too complex. Mothers could not handle that concept. So Nowadays, I think there's been a revision in thinking, and with what you would see later on, there may be a practical way to take this into fruition. When we look at the protein composition of breast milk, this is just kind of a macro perspective of that, but you can see that we have casein here in mature milk with an average of about 40%. This casein is very different from the cow's milk casein, but if you have a whey dominant formula, so when you adjust the weight to casein ratio of cow's milk formula, you will have about 40% casein, but of different composition. Then you have beta-lactoglobulin, which is a protein we don't have in breast milk at all. There's not a single trace of that. We don't even have the gene for making beta-lactoglobulin. And in fact, we don't know quite yet why cows make beta-lactoglobulin either, but it's a protein we don't have. Alpha-lactalbumin is an interesting one, and I'll come back to that one. It's present in whey-dominant formula. It's a major component of cow's whey, just as human whey. And these two are actually quite similar. And I'll come back and amplify that later on, but I put them both in red because they have a lot of similarity. And then there's a mixed bag of other whey proteins, and I put those in different colors because some of them are a little bit different from each other, some are more similar. One of the things that happens when you go down in protein level is that if you get too close to the breast milk level of protein, then the first limiting amino acid becomes tryptophan. And here you can see that you can actually do that, and that has been done by several companies, both by Nestle in Europe and by Wyeth at that time in the US. If you enrich the alpha-lactalbumin content or put more alpha-lactalbumin, and you can do that with specific sources of dairy fractions, then you can see that if you have very little of the alpha-lactalbumin, the serum tryptophan is lower than in breastfed infants, but if you put a higher proportion, then you can get it up to what you see in breastfed infants. And that is what most regulatory bodies consider the lower limit. It has to be as high as in breastfed infants. So with protein reduction, it's a good idea to add alpha-lactalbumin. And I will amplify that also later. Kadu and I have done one study, and I just would like to highlight one of the things that we saw in that. There have been other studies too, but we actually did use staging in this one. We had a low protein formula, closer to breast milk at 12 grams per liter for the first 2 months, and then 10.7 for the next 3 months after that. Breast milk at 1 month is about 10.5. So it certainly is more protein than in breast milk. And we also tried a couple of permutations at that time. It was some time ago, but we also used Similac at the time when that one was casein predominant. It was not a Ross study or Abbott study, and we actually got university support for this one. No formula company supported this one. So, and then we had the 60-40, so we had 2 higher protein levels, 2 different ratios. We had a whey predominant in a staging one. And I just would like to highlight some of the results, not go into details, but what we saw in all of these, and it was not a significant difference among the groups, but in all the formula-fed groups, the plasma insulin at 5 months was significantly higher. So even if we would go down to that level, there is more branched-chain amino acids, more insulinogenic amino acids, more circulating plasma insulin in formula-fed infants. And this is why I think it would be beneficial to work harder on trying to reduce the protein excess in infant formula. And here are the sum of the plasma insulin-releasing amino acids, showing that it's most likely that which is having the effect on insulin. Others have shown this also, and work is in progress, but the concept we're going to talk about today may be very helpful when it comes to alleviating this problem as I see it. So I discussed now protein in general, the level of it, and some of the major protein classes. But one of the things that many of us would like to see is also to add bioactive milk proteins or dairy fractions to infant formula. We want to add new carbohydrate fractions, and I'll come back to that. There's still work to do with lipid sources, particularly long-chain fatty acids, where we get them from and what ratios the fatty acids should have in these. Work is needed. We need better calcium sources. The calcium content of infant formula is largely double that of breast milk. And I think that may not be too beneficial to formula-fed infants. So if we then look at staging as one possibility to come to realize some of these possibilities that we have on the table, you can see how it has been for quite some time. We have infant formula in the US, mostly the same formula used up to 12 months. Europe is strictly up to 6 months, and then they have what is called follow-on milk, which is heavily debated right now in Europe of what kind of merits that product has. That's not my task to discuss today. But we then could put a time spectrum here where we just could have different types of infant formula at different ages with different composition to try to address these issues that I have brought up to your attention. What I really like, and Pepe alluded to, we have been working quite a lot on the workhorses in human milk, the proteins that provide bioactivities. And I just listed a few of these, and I will give you some specific examples. But I mentioned earlier lactoferrin, lysozyme, secretory IgA, haptocorin, vitamin B12 binding protein is the old name for haptocorin, lactoperoxidase, alpha-lactalbumin, bile salt stimulated lipase, kappa-casein, beta-casein. All of these provide bioactivities. Down in the small intestine, it can provide things for the breastfed infant. Well, can bioactive proteins or factors be added to infant formula? Yes, they can. Bovine milk proteins may have part of the activity of human milk proteins, or many of them, depending on the protein. And we have worked specifically on lactoferrin. I think that the research on secretory IgA right now is relatively dormant, but there has been research on hyperimmunized cows where they will be exposed to pathogens. You will have secretory IgA being formed. It's a possibility. Alpha-lactalbumin, like I said, is already added or enriched in infant formula, and it may provide bioactivities. Lactoferrin is an interesting protein because it has so many different functions. It is bacteriostatic, it can inhibit the growth of pathogens. It is bactericidal, it can kill pathogens, particularly one large fragment of lactoferrin called lactoferricin. It has antiviral activity, facilitates the uptake of iron into the mucosal cell. It affects the immune system, and it's a growth factor. And what we have shown, and I think this is amplifying now what I'm talking about, bioactive proteins. Well, why aren't these digested? Normally you and I, if we eat lactoferrin, we would digest it and it would be amino acids and iron basically. Well, lactoferrin is a tough protein to digest. It has a structure that makes it less available for proteases in both pepsin and the pancreatic enzymes have a hard time digesting lactoferrin. Doesn't mean that it's totally resistant, but this is the first study that Laura Davidson and I did quite some time ago, but here you can see that the red here is intact lactoferrin in the stool of breastfed infants. So here you have substantial quantities of intact lactoferrin in the stool up to 4 months of age. And this is way more lactoferrin than there is iron in breast milk on a molar basis. So certainly lactoferrin can have iron on it and provide iron to the mucosal cell also. But you can see that this fraction that survives is diminishing. And you can see that on the right-hand scale here, where you have grams of intake during the 24-hour period. So it starts up at 2.3 perhaps grams, and it goes down lactation. But it's relatively flat here while it's falling here. So the digestive capacity, of course, of the breastfed infant is increasing. It's digesting more and more lactoferrin, but still substantial or significant quantities of lactoferrin will survive and can therefore act in the small intestine. And in fact, I don't have time to go into it, but we have shown recently that lactoferrin is actually going into the enterocyte, going to the nucleus of the enterocyte and affecting gene expression. Cytokine expression is affected, which could explain the effect of lactoferrin on the immune system. It's affecting signaling pathways when it comes to cellular growth and proliferation, which could explain that effect of lactoferrin. So it's a fascinating protein, in my opinion. Alpha-lactalbumin is a little bit different. Here, I think it's a matter of function during transit. Alpha-lactalbumin will be taken in by the infant, and then it will be partially broken down into larger peptides. And some of these larger peptides are very interesting. Some of them are prebiotic, they stimulate the growth of the right type of microorganisms. There's an immune stimulatory tripeptide, GLF. Some of these peptides bind iron and zinc and facilitate their uptake into the enterocyte, and there are some that are antibacterial. But most likely, their action will be in the small intestine. Small amounts may survive and not be absorbed and may exert an effect further down in the colon. We don't know that because the antibodies against alpha-lactalbumin will not pick up these small peptides. But largely, alpha-lactalbumin will result in amino acids. It's not found in the stool like lactoferrin or secretory IgA, for example. And these amino acids are very nice because I mentioned already earlier that alpha-lactalbumin is high in tryptophan, which the infant needs. It's also high in lysine and cysteine, which are amino acids that also become limiting in infants. So it's a good source of amino acids. I'm not a carbohydrate chemist. I'm referring to the work by Dave Newberg, several others. But there are, of course, the human milk or breast milk oligosaccharides, very complex carbohydrate structures that are particularly present in early lactation. They are complex and not easy to synthesize, unfortunately. And therefore, there's always been a wish, because these oligosaccharides, they do two things. They stimulate the right type of microflora. They stimulate the beneficial microorganisms. But also they serve as decoys, because the structures on these oligosaccharides are similar to what you have on the mucosal wall of the small intestine. So they actually can work as decoys and prevent attachment and invasion of pathogens. In infant formula, we see to date fructo and galacto oligosaccharides, or FOS and GOS as they're called. These can have prebiotic activity, that is doing part of this job, but they're not receptor analogs and therefore would not have the preventive effect as the human milk oligosaccharides have been shown to have. Lipids, I'm just going to gloss over. I have not been involved much in lipid research on breast milk, more than observational studies. But you can see here that milk lipids, which is largely triglycerides, 98% of the lipids are triglycerides, they go up early on in lactation. But the two ones that we often like to discuss, DHA and arachidonic acid, which we now, or companies, are adding to infant formula, they are high early on and then go down. And they're most likely, all studies to date, I think, show that preterm infants can benefit from these. The support for the term infant is much less strong, I would say. And if it has an effect, it's most likely in the very early period of life. I myself, and also Eckhart, who you're going to listen to soon, have worked quite a bit on iron and zinc. And here you can see the dramatic difference in the iron content of breast milk and the iron content of infant formula. And I think definitely that the iron content of infant formula should be reduced, not to this level, but certainly down, because it's a very pro-oxidative element, and I don't think infants need that much iron early on. Later on they do. Zinc, you can see breast milk is a little bit weak here, but it's quite a bit lower zinc in formula. most likely doesn't exert any negative effect, but you can see that it's several-fold higher than it is in breast milk. So the staged approach that you will hear more about that can be used for infant formula, I think is a step towards what we call personalizing nutrition or individualizing nutrition. So we fit the nutrient intake more with development of the infant, what they require, what they need. And some of the things that I would like to see is altering the caloric density of formula, decreasing the protein level you heard about, changing the protein composition, adding bioactive components such as proteins, oligosaccharides, fatty acids in formula for younger infants. Many of these are expensive components. Why add them to an age bracket where they certainly don't need them? Add them early on when they may be in critical need, and then some nutrients like iron and zinc in formula for very young infants, you can minimize these because A, they don't need them, and there's a potential risk of having too much in there. But the staging allows all of these things to be realized. So with that, I hope that formula composition can be improved. The growth patterns will become more similar to those of breastfed infants. We'll have lower blood urea nitrogen, plasma amino acids, and insulin. And the performance hopefully will become more similar to that of breastfed infants, with the goal, of course, that we will get improved long-term outcomes. Thank you very much.